Hi, everybody. My name is Travis Gudenrath, and today I'm going to be presenting on Dr. Insoo Berg, who is often attributed as the founding mother of solution-focused brief intervention therapy. Now, first, a little bit of background on Dr. Insoo Berg herself. Dr. Insoo Berg was born on July 25th in 1934 in Korea. Now, for those of you that aren't history buffs, what was going on in Korea from 1949 to 1954 or 1947 to about 1954, was the Korean War, where obviously the United States, supporting South Korea, fought against the North Koreans, supported by the Chinese. It was a proxy war. About 58,000 Americans died, and millions of Koreans, both South and North Korean, lost their lives, and the continent, or the subcontinent itself, the country was ravished, both of them, North and South Korea. So Dr. Insoo Berg grew up during this time. She grew up during the throes of warfare. And that's important because it'll come into play later with the work that she does. Now, Dr. Insoo Berg was from a relatively wealthy family. They were in the pharmaceutical production business, and her parents told her that they had decided she was to become a pharmacist. And she was raised in a culture in which if you were going to go to school, your parents told you what to study, you studied that, and that became your career. So she studied at the Ewha Women's University in Seoul to get a degree in pharmacology, and she actually came to the United States to continue her degree, and she studied at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And when she came to the United States, she had a pretty big culture shock in realizing that a lot of the US students that were here were trying to figure out what to study, what classes to take, things we can all relate to in our culture. And the autonomy of students deciding what they could get to study really shocked her. And she realized that now, in the United States and not in Korea, she had a lot more flexibility to decide. And after working in a hospital studying stomach cancer for a long time, she decided that she wanted to help people in a different capacity. And so I guess I can refer to her as Dr. Berg. We'll say Dr. Berg for short, Dr. Insoo Berg. While she was studying Wisconsin-Milwaukee, she got interested in the Mental Research Institute, which was located in Palo Alto, California, and she became involved in social work. That's what she switched her study to. Now, at this time, social work was heavily dominated, along with the rest of psychology and counseling, by psychodynamic theories, right? Our Freudians, our Alderians, everything like that. And very much a problem-centered approach, right? Later on in one of the interviews that I got to read that was done with Dr. Dr. Berg, was that she detested the fact that a lot of psychodynamics was based upon problem-centered, right? And that the goal was to remove obstacles that were causing the problem, where she believed instead of looking at what's wrong with the client, we should instead focus on what is right with the client, what is good, what are their strengths. She believed that any client who was willing to schedule an appointment, show up and pay for that appointment, already has a measure of hope and already at some level has a belief that there is a solution to their problem, or else they wouldn't show up. And through her experiences in psychodynamics, specifically working with veterans returning from Vietnam and Wisconsin, seeing people who were devastated by war and conflict, and her herself having her own experience being raised in Korea during the Korean War, she came to a realization that for herself personally, although she had some fear about separating from the general, as she refers to, flock or herd of people in the field that were focused, that were problem-centered, she instead, going back and forth between Wisconsin and the Mental Research Institution of Palo Alto, started working with a man who became her husband, actually, and that was Dr. DeShazer. And Dr. DeShazer had been influenced by Dr. Hayer, who was kind of like the first person in the field to really start looking at positive influence, focusing on the solution rather than just the problem. And so Dr. Insoo Berg, alongside Dr. DeShazer, who became her husband, kind of founded this field of solution-focused brief intervention therapy, right? And so what is that? Often commonly referred to as SFBIT, right? Or just SF, solution focused. Dr. Insoo Berg, along with Dr. DeShazer, they came up with a modality of therapy that was pretty controversial for a number of reasons. First and foremost, At this point in time, Dr. Insoo Kim Berg is a part of her. I'm sorry, I mixed those up. Dr. Insoo Kim Berg, as a part of her training, was doing marriage and family therapy, and one of the requirements was that families had to be in therapy for at least a year for her in order to complete that part of her training. And she heavily disagreed with the idea of therapy needing to last at least a year, sometimes multiple years, for the desired results to be achieved. And she instead, along with Dr. DeShazer, focused on an aspect of a brief intervention, right? We're talking maybe 5 to 6 sessions in the course of a couple weeks or a couple months. Maybe, I think she doesn't recommend anything below 10 to 12 weeks, but a relatively brief intervention period, right? And what she's a huge proponent of, Dr. Insoo Kim Berg, is instead of focusing on the problem, focus on the solution. And in an interview, she talks about that her and her then husband, Dr. DeShazer, um, discovered, talking with clients time and again, that how clients described their problem was vastly different and ultimately not at all connected to how they describe their solution. And the interview that I cite, she provides an example of, you can talk with, a horrible alcoholic family. Their problem is the alcoholism, but the solution they give is we just need to sit down and eat together more. We need to talk more. We need to connect, right? The problem of alcoholism, vastly different from the solution of just sitting down and having dinner together more often as a family unit, right? And so sorry, SFBIT, I'll refer to it as SF, solution focused, focuses on when these clients come in, we focus on their strengths, which is a little bit of positive psychology, right? But when it is specifically in solution focused, right, the client kind of outlines what their problem is, and immediately as the therapist or the counselor, you start getting to, okay, well, what would be solutions to this? What's worked for you in the past, right? And there's several tools that you can use in SF. First and foremost of them, the one that Dr. Insoo Kim Berg came up with herself, was the miracle question, right? If you were to go to sleep tonight and wake up tomorrow morning and this problem in all its capacities has been solved, but it was while you were asleep, so you didn't know how it was solved, what's like the first thing that would tell you it had been solved? What's the first indicator? What's the first sign that this problem is gone, right? And so what she found is, starting with clients at that simple point, right? If you have a husband and wife that are on the verge of divorce and the problem is that they just don't listen and they don't talk to each other at all, and they're worried they're not in love anymore, right? You can ask the miracle question, well, what would it look like if this problem disappeared overnight? What would be something you look for? What would tell you that? And the husband or the wife or the partners, sorry, one of the partners might say, well, I would wake up and I would look at my partner and I would really hope that they have a good day. I genuinely hope that. Or maybe we're at breakfast, they would ask me about how my work is going, or I would care to ask them how their work is going, right? What this miracle question does is it shows the client that the things that would bring about their miracle start with very small, achievable, doable tasks, changes they can make that can bring about their miracle. It actively engages the client in bringing about the miracle they seek. Another one is scaling, right? So if you're dealing with a client that is stating they suffer from intense depression, you can ask them on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not at all existent or affecting you, 10 being extreme, affecting you now more than anything else, where would you rate your depression today? And they might say, an 8 when they first come in. And after working with them for a couple of weeks and going over solution-based things, they might again say their depression is bad. You ask them to scale again. And they say, well, it's about a 5. And you could work with them and say, well, that's significantly down than when you first came in. This works especially well. Dr. Insoo Kim Berg states that this scaling method works especially well with clients that have difficulty seeing their own progress. Clients that struggle with seeing how the solution is, clients that usually get too focused on big picture changes, right? Things that might be not doable for the time being. And so, the miracle question and the scaling as well. There's a person in my life, a supervisor at my job, who's a marriage and family therapist, and he has a take on the miracle question that I really like. It's a mix of, and he is also a solution focused. So I'll include this tidbit. It's not a part of the presentation, I guess, but it's interesting. And he has this very interesting take where he combines the miracle question with a little bit of positive reframing. He says, imagine if you could do something. So, I tell him, I'm struggling fitting in at this new job, some imposter syndrome. You'd say, imagine, Travis, if you could feel comfortable in your own skin. Just imagine if you could do that right now. Imagine if you could step up into that. And what that does is it comes off in this kind of empowering way where I realize, he has a point, right? It might be hard, but I can do that. Or maybe I can't yet, but maybe I could step up into something else. Overall, solution focused had a very large impact on counseling and therapy as a whole profession because it challenged a lot of old notions. One, it challenged the idea of being problem centered, referring to what's wrong with clients instead of what can be good with them. Two, it dispelled the notion that someone has to be in years of therapy, breaking down years of layers and defense mechanisms for there to be any significant long lasting growth. And three, it gave a lot of power to the client. It requires the therapist to trust that the client truly already in some way believes in themselves, or else they wouldn't be there. And that the counselor and therapist role is relatively small, or rather, it's only for a small part of their journey. Dr. Insoo Berg, in her interview, Insoo Kim Berg makes the statement of, when I work with clients, my goal is not to hold their hand the rest of their life. It is to be with them for a small part of their journey, holding their hand, guiding them through a small process, and the rest of their journey is up to them. And why I picked presenting about Dr. Insoo Kim Berg, she's, obviously an amazingly talented and brilliant woman. But it just astounds me, to be a child growing up in a war-torn country, bearing witness to, all the attendant atrocities of an active war zone, to come from a culture that was restrictive of her desires, and for her to, from that place, be so solution-based, focused on the positive, to carry that energy to go, I get what the problem is. We understand that. What's the solution? She prioritizes what is good, what is happy, what is helpful, what is solution over what is wrong. And she does it in a way without clients feeling like they're not heard or their problems ignored. In the interview, she states that most clients feel as if they are heard and they feel empowered in the process of doing the work that they're doing with her. And the last thing I want to close on is, although unfortunately Dr. Insoo Kim Berg passed away in early 2000s and 2004, we can see, in the field today, the long-lasting effects. This was going on along the same time in the 70s as, Dr. Carl Rogers and Rogerian therapy and person-centered therapy, an offshoot of existential, or rather an evolution of. And we can see that effect in counseling and psychology today, the power of solution-focused brief intervention therapy. And it's a modality of therapy I hope to learn more about myself, and that I can get to use. But on a very personal note, I loved doing this presentation. This was really cool. I loved it a lot, and I got to learn a lot. So thank you. I hope you all have a good day. And remember, stay in the solution.